strange how a relationship can fall apart without making a sound. No screaming matches, no slamming doors. Just silence, creeping in, stretching the gaps between us until I couldn't ignore it anymore. Jessica and I, we used to be that couple everyone envied. We met at a bar of all places. She was sipping a whiskey neat, talking with the bartender like she owned the joint. Confident, sharp-tongued, and a bit of a wild card. I loved that about her. But lately, felt like I was living with a ghost. It started with her pulling away, little by little. At first, it was nothing huge, nothing worth worrying about. Just small things. She used to tell me every detail about her day, from office drama to what she had for lunch. But now, I'd ask her how her day was, and she'd mumble, "Fine," just that. No follow-up, no, and guess what else happened like she used to? I noticed she'd get more defensive about her phone. It used to sit face up on the kitchen counter while we cooked, or it would be buried under her pile of work files. Now, she always kept it on her, like it was glued to her hand. I brushed it off at first. People get busy, right? But there was something about the way she'd glance at it when she thought I wasn't looking. That quick swipe of her thumb before slipping it back into her purse. The first real crack was when she started working late. She's an attorney, so the hours have always been long, but it turned into a regular thing. "Got a late client meeting," she'd say, kissing me on the cheek as she left. But those meetings went from once a week to twice, then 3 times. And the excuses well, they didn't feel like real excuses. Traffic was a nightmare. The firm's new client is killing me. My boss is demanding extra hours this month. Her words felt scripted, as if she was repeating lines from a play she'd memorized too well. But it was the way she said them, like she didn't care if I believed her or not. That got to me. It wasn't just that, though. There was something deeper, more unsettling. It was the way she touched me, or rather, didn't. The woman who used to curl into me every night, fall asleep with her hand resting on my chest, now seemed almost allergic to me. She'd shrug off hugs, slide away from my side in bed. When I asked if something was wrong, she'd brush it off with a "you're overthinking things. Babe, I'm just tired." Tired. Yeah, right. But the kicker, the one thing that really made my stomach drop, was the morning her key stopped working in the front door. I'll never forget it. She came home after one of her late meetings, fumbling with her keys at the door while I sat on the couch, watching her through the front window. She tried once, then again, and then I watched as the strange look came over her face, like confusion mixed with guilt. She knocked, lightly at first. When I opened the door, she gave me this sheepish smile, almost too casual, like we were just having a normal day. "Hey babe, he's not working for some reason." Weird, right? It wasn't just weird. It was the moment I knew something had shifted in a way I couldn't ignore anymore. I let her in, but my mind was racing. That key, it had unlocked our home 1,000 times before. Why now? Why her key? She called it an innocent mistake. But the unease in her voice lingered in my mind. There was something she wasn't telling me, and I could feel it like a knot tightening in my chest. But instead of confronting her, I let it slide. That was my first mistake. But I wasn't ready for what came next. After the key incident, everything felt off, like the air in the house had thickened, suffocating but silent. I couldn't get the image of her fumbling at the door out of my head. The way she had stood there, confused, almost embarrassed, as if the door was rejecting her. That innocent mistake, as she called it, didn't sit right with me. But instead of confronting her, I buried it. I shoved that feeling down deep and pretended like everything was fine. Maybe I wasn't ready to admit what was really happening. I mean, who wants to believe their wife might be hiding something? Especially someone like Jessica. She was sharp, always 2 steps ahead of everyone else. But lately, that sharpness had turned into coldness. It wasn't just the late nights at work anymore. There were subtle things, small details that added up like puzzle pieces you can't quite fit together but know should form a picture. She used to leave her purse anywhere, in the living room, kitchen, wherever. But now, she kept it close, like it had secrets tucked inside. The phone, too, always face down, and I swear, I started noticing her checking it in the middle of the night when she thought I was asleep. One Friday night, we were supposed to have dinner together like we used to. I made reservations at this cozy little Italian place we loved. I remember texting her earlier that day, excited, thinking maybe this dinner could bring us back to normal. She responded with a simple, "Sounds good." No exclamation points. No "can't wait." Just "sounds good." Like she was replying to a coworker about a meeting, not her husband about a date. She didn't come home in time. I waited at the restaurant, feeling more like an idiot with each passing minute. I kept staring at the door, imagining her walking in, smiling, apologizing for being late like she used to when she got caught up at work. But the minutes dragged on, and I felt the eyes of the waiter burning into me as I kept saying, "She'll be here soon. Just a few more minutes." 45 minutes later, I paid for the untouched wine and left. When I got home, I found her in the kitchen, pouring herself a glass of water. She didn't even flinch when she saw me, didn't apologize, didn't explain, just glanced at me and said, "Oh, did you eat without me?" Like it was my fault for not waiting longer. Something snapped inside me then. I could feel the anger bubbling up, my heart pounding in my chest. But still, I held back. "We had dinner plans," I said, my voice barely steady. She shrugged, her back to me as she rinsed her glass. "I had to stay late. Couldn't be helped. We'll go some other time." It was the indifference that got me. The complete disregard for my feelings, for our evening. It was like she didn't even care enough to make an excuse this time. And then came the final blow. Her phone buzzed on the counter, vibrating with a soft hum against the marble. I glanced at it before she could grab it. A name flashed on the screen that I didn't recognize. Ben. Just that. No last name, no context, just a name that felt like a slap in the face. I didn't say anything. I just stood there, frozen, while she snatched the phone up like it was nothing. Her fingers flew over the screen as she texted back, her expression calm, collected, like she was handling something important. But my mind was racing. Ben? Who the hell was Ben? I asked, my voice quieter than I intended. "Who's Ben?" She didn't even look up, just tossed her phone back into her purse and shrugged again. That same dismissive shrug that had become her signature move. "Just someone from work. Don't be paranoid." But the way she said it, there was no reassurance, no warmth. Just emptiness. Like she didn't even care if I believed her anymore. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of her beside me in the bed we used to share. Felt like I was lying next to a stranger. She didn't reach for me, didn't try to explain or comfort me. She just rolled over, her back to me, and fell asleep within minutes, as if nothing had happened. But I knew something had. Something had shifted, and I couldn't ignore it anymore. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of Jessica quietly moving around the bedroom. The room was dimly lit, curtains still drawn, and she was getting dressed like she was trying not to wake me. She hadn't done that in years. Usually, she'd be talking to me, or at least kissing me on the forehead before heading out for the day. But now, felt like she was sneaking out. I kept my eyes closed, listening to her zip up her bag, the soft click of her heels on the hardwood floor. I waited for her to say something. Anything. A good morning. A casual explanation for why she had bailed on dinner the night before. But nothing came. Just silence and that sinking feeling in my chest. When I finally heard the front door click shut, I opened my eyes and stared at the ceiling again. That familiar knot was back, twisting in my stomach. I could feel it. She was slipping away, and there was no way I could pretend otherwise anymore. I sat up, rubbed my face, and glanced at her side of the bed. Cold. She'd been up for a while, apparently. I wandered into the kitchen, my head still spinning from the night before. The house was eerily quiet, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was happening right under my nose. My mind kept circling back to that name, Ben. I poured myself some coffee, but I couldn't taste it. Everything felt numb, like I was living in some kind of weird fog. I knew I couldn't sit around wondering anymore. The thought of her key not working, the missed dinner, the text from some guy I'd never heard of. All of it piled up in my head like a storm I was trying to outrun. So I did something I never thought I'd do. I checked her phone. It was sitting on the counter, the screen dark, taunting me. My stomach churned as I picked it up, my fingers hovering over the lock screen. But of course, it was locked with a passcode I didn't know. I shouldn't have been surprised, but it still felt like a punch in the gut. She had changed it. She used to give me her code without a second thought. back when we didn't have anything to hide from each other. I put the phone down, my hands shaking. What the hell was happening? I felt like I was going crazy, second-guessing every little thing, every moment we'd shared recently. Was this all in my head? Was I really being paranoid like she said? I couldn't take it anymore. I needed answers. I needed to know who Ben was, and I needed to hear it from her, face to face. No more vague excuses, no more late nights without an explanation. That evening, when she finally came home, I was ready. I had spent the entire day running through every possible scenario in my head, trying to decide how to bring it up. But when she walked in, all those rehearsed lines fell apart. She came through the door, dressed in her usual business casual, looking as if everything was completely normal. I stood up from the couch, my heart pounding. She barely glanced at me, tossing her purse onto the counter, clearly oblivious to the storm brewing in my head. "Hey," she said, her voice flat, almost mechanical. I didn't respond right away, just watched her as she opened the fridge and pulled out a bottle of water. She twisted the cap, took a long sip, and then finally looked at me. "What's up? What's up?" That was it? That was all she had to say after disappearing the night before and brushing me off like I was some random guy she barely knew? I couldn't hold it in anymore. Who the hell is Ben, Jessica? The question hung in the air between us, heavy and tense. I saw the briefest flicker of something in her eyes. Was it fear? Annoyance? It vanished too quickly for me to pin down. She sighed, her expression hardening as she set the water bottle down with a soft thud. "Are we really doing this?" she asked, her tone cold, like I had just accused her of something petty. "Yes, we are. Who is he? Why is he texting you in the middle of the night? And don't tell me it's nothing, because I know it's not." She crossed her arms, leaning back against the counter. "Ben is a colleague. He works with me on a case. That's it. You're blowing this way out of proportion." I stared at her, trying to gauge if she was lying, but her face was a stone wall. That same indifference, that same shrug. She was too calm, too collected, and that pissed me off more than anything. If he's just a colleague, why didn't you mention him before? And why does he need to text you at night? My voice was rising, but I couldn't help it. I needed answers, and I needed her to stop acting like I was some paranoid fool. Jessica sighed again, this time louder, like she was exasperated. "Because it's not a big deal. I didn't think I had to tell you every single person I talked to at work." Jesus, Daniel, can you calm down for once? Calm down? My head was spinning. She was deflecting, pushing the blame back on me, making me feel like I was overreacting. But I knew I wasn't. I could feel the distance between us growing by the second, and all I wanted was for her to just admit it. Admit that something was wrong. But she didn't. She just stood there, staring at me with that blank expression, like I was the problem, like I was the one making everything complicated. That was when I realized she wasn't going to tell me the truth, not willingly. After that argument, things only got worse. Jessica didn't offer any more explanations, and I wasn't buying her excuse about Ben from work. Her dismissal left a crack in our relationship, and every time we interacted after that, the crack deepened. The atmosphere at home turned into something hostile, suffocating in its silence. We moved around each other like strangers, no longer sharing the little moments that made us feel connected. No lingering touches, no playful banter. I couldn't stop thinking about her face when I'd confronted her. The way she looked at me, bored, like I was just some obstacle to her routine, not her husband. I was spiraling, trying to make sense of it all, but the more I thought about it, the more I felt like I was losing my grip on reality. How did we get here? How did she get here? One night, about a week later, I was in the bathroom brushing my teeth when I heard her phone buzz again from the bedroom. My pulse quickened. I knew I wasn't supposed to go through her things, but every nerve in my body screamed at me to check. I walked into the bedroom slowly, staring at the phone sitting on the nightstand, the screen lighting up the darkened room like some damn beacon. I didn't want to be that guy, the one who snoops, but I couldn't stop myself. I picked it up, my hands trembling, heart racing in my chest like it was about to explode. The message was from Ben. "Tomorrow night, usual place. Can't wait to see you." Winky face. My blood ran cold. The words felt like acid searing through me, burning a hole straight into my gut. Usual place? See you? What the actual F*** was going on? Before I could even think, I heard her voice behind me. What the hell do you think you're doing? I spun around, and there she was, standing in the doorway, arms crossed, eyes blazing. I'd never seen her look at me like that before, like she was daring me to confront her. It wasn't fear I saw in her face. It was anger. I held up the phone, my voice shaking with fury. What is this, Jessica? Who is this guy? And why is he texting you about meeting up at some usual place? You want to keep pretending like this is nothing? Her eyes narrowed, her lips curling into a sarcastic smile that sent chills down my spine. Are you really going through my messages now? Jesus, Daniel, how insecure can you be? She snatched the phone out of my hand, her fingers tight around it like she was protecting a lifeline. You've lost it. Completely. I've lost it. I could barely keep my voice steady. You're the one sneaking around, meeting up with some guy behind my back, lying to me, and I'm the one who's lost it? Don't treat me like I'm crazy, Jessica. I'm not blind. She rolled her eyes, that same dismissive gesture she always used to shut me down. Oh my God. You're acting like such a child. Ben is just a friend. We grab drinks sometimes after work. It's not what you think. I felt my fists clench, every muscle in my body screaming to hit something. Anything. Drinks? Really? Then why the secrecy? Why didn't you tell me? Why do you act like this every time I ask you something? Because you make it impossible to talk to you when you get like this? She snapped, her voice rising, full of venom. You're so damn paranoid, Daniel. You twist everything into some crazy conspiracy. I'm allowed to have friends, to go out without giving you and the itinerary. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She was turning this on me, making me out to be the unreasonable one, when she was the one lying, sneaking around. Friends don't send texts like that, Jessica. Don't stand there and tell me I'm paranoid when it's obvious something's going on. Her expression changed then, hardening into something cruel. She took a step closer, her eyes narrowing as she stared me down. You want to know what's really going on? Fine. She leaned in, her voice dropping to a cold whisper. Maybe if you weren't so suffocating, I wouldn't need to have drinks with other people. Maybe if you actually paid attention to me instead of obsessing over your own insecurities, we wouldn't be having this conversation. I felt like she'd slapped me, her words slicing through me like a knife. My chest tightened, anger and hurt mixing into something almost unbearable. I opened my mouth to respond, but nothing came out. She stood there, waiting, watching me struggle, her eyes daring me to push back. Jessica? I managed to choke out, my voice barely above a whisper. I'm trying. I've always tried. But you're shutting me out. You're pushing me away. Why? Why are you doing this? For a split second, I thought I saw something in her eyes, something almost like regret, but it was gone as fast as it came. She shook her head, her expression cold again. Because, Daniel, maybe I'm just done with this. Maybe you're not what I need anymore. Her words landed like a punch to the gut, knocking the air out of me. I stood there, stunned, my heart shattering into 1,000 pieces. Not what she needed anymore. The woman I had loved, trusted, and built my life around was standing in front of me, telling me that I wasn't enough for her. She grabbed her phone, turned, and walked out of the bedroom without another word. The door slammed behind her, the sound echoing through the house like a final, brutal reminder of how far we'd fallen. I stood there for what felt like hours, staring at the door, trying to process what had just happened. My mind was racing, replaying every word she had said, every look, every gesture. And all I could feel was the hollow ache of betrayal, coursing through me like poison. This wasn't just about Ben. This wasn't just about some guy from work. This was something deeper. She didn't love me anymore, and she didn't even care enough to lie about it. That night, I didn't sleep. How could I? Her words kept replaying in my head, each one digging deeper than the last. Maybe you're not what I need anymore. I lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling, feeling my chest tighten with every breath. I didn't cry, couldn't. I just felt numb, like the person I had trusted more than anyone, the woman I had married, had ripped my heart out and left me holding it, wondering what I had done wrong. She didn't come back to bed. I heard her moving around downstairs, pacing, probably scrolling through her phone, texting Ben. The thought of her talking to him, maybe even laughing at my expense, made me want to punch a hole in the wall. But I didn't. I just lay there, paralyzed, trying to figure out when things had gone so terribly wrong. By the time morning came, I was running on fumes, barely able to think straight. I went downstairs, hoping for some kind of normalcy, but she wasn't there. The house felt too quiet, like the calm before a storm, and I knew something was coming. I just didn't know when or how hard it was going to hit. I found a note on the counter. No text, no explanation, just a goddamn sticky note. Gone for the day. Don't wait up. Jess. No, I love you. No smiley face, nothing. Just her name, like I was someone she didn't even know anymore. My heart sank lower than I thought it could. This was it. This was the beginning of the end, and I wasn't ready for it. The hours dragged on. I couldn't focus on anything. I tried distracting myself. TV, going for a run, even scrolling through my own phone, hoping for some mindless distraction. But all I could think about was her. Where was she? Was she with him? Was she sitting across from Ben right now, at their usual place, smiling at him the way she used to smile at me? I wanted to scream, but what good would that do? I had let her slip through my fingers, and now I was paying the price. By the time night rolled around, I was sitting in the kitchen, staring at the clock. Every minute felt like an hour. I kept checking my phone, hoping for a message from her. Anything that would give me a sliver of hope that she hadn't completely given up on us. But nothing came. The silence was suffocating. Then, just before midnight, I heard the front door open. I stayed seated at the table, my hands gripping the edge, bracing myself for whatever was coming next. She walked in like nothing had happened. No rush in her step, no apology on her face. She tossed her purse onto the chair and glanced at me, her expression completely neutral, like she hadn't just abandoned me for an entire day. I couldn't hold it in anymore. Where the hell were you, Jessica? She didn't answer right away. She just looked at me, her eyes narrowing, as if she was deciding whether or not I even deserved a response. Finally, she shrugged. I told you I was out. That's it? You were just out. My voice was shaking, and I hated that she could hear it. I hated how much power she had over me in that moment. All day? No explanation, no call, no nothing. I don't owe you a play-by-play, Daniel, she said, her voice calm, eerily calm. I told you not to wait up. So why are you sitting here like some wounded puppy? I stood up, my hands clenched into fists. Because I'm your husband. Because this is our marriage. You don't just disappear for a day and act like everything's fine. What is happening to us, Jess? You're not even trying anymore. She sighed, rolling her eyes, and I could see it. The exhaustion on her face. Not from her day, not from work, but from me. She was tired of me. You're making this so much bigger than it needs to be, she said, walking past me to the fridge like we weren't even having a conversation. She pulled out a bottle of wine, pouring herself a glass, while I stood there, my world collapsing around me. I just needed some space. You're suffocating me, Daniel. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My voice cracked as I spoke. Suffocating you? Are you kidding me? You're the one who's been lying, sneaking around, acting like I don't even exist. And now you're blaming me? For what? Caring too much. She took a slow sip of her wine, her eyes locked on mine, completely unfazed. It's not about caring, Daniel. It's about control. You always need to know where I am, what I'm doing, who I'm with. It's exhausting. That's not true, I shouted, my voice louder than I intended. I've always trusted you, Jess, but you've given me every reason not to lately. The late nights, the secrecy, the texts from Ben. What the hell am I supposed to think? She stared at me, and for a moment, I thought I saw something in her eyes. Maybe guilt, maybe regret, but it disappeared as quickly as it came. Ben's just a friend, she said flatly, like she had rehearsed the line 100 times. And if you can't handle that, maybe that's your problem, not mine. That was it. I was done. I couldn't stand there and listen to her lie to my face anymore. Couldn't let her twist everything around to make me the villain. My chest was tight, my breathing shallow, but I wasn't going to let her see how much this was breaking me. You know what, Jessica? I said, My voice quiet but steady. You can keep pretending this is all in my head. But I'm not stupid. You think I don't know what's going on? You think I can't see it? You're not just pushing me away. You've already checked out. She didn't respond. She just stood there, holding her glass of wine, staring at me with that same cold indifference. Like none of this mattered. Like I didn't matter. I felt the last shred of hope slip through my fingers. The woman I loved was gone, and in her place was someone I didn't recognize. Someone who didn't care enough to even try anymore. Without another word, I walked past her, grabbed my jacket, and left the house. I needed air. I needed to breathe, because in that moment, I realized something that I had been too afraid to admit. Jessica wasn't just cheating on me. She had already made her choice. And it wasn't me. I don't know how long I drove that night. The streets were quiet, empty, as if the world itself was mocking the chaos inside me. I couldn't go far. There was nowhere to go. I didn't have a plan. I just needed to get away from her, from that house, from everything we used to be. At some point, I ended up at a gas station on the edge of town. It was one of those all-night places with the bright neon lights flickering like they were on their last breath. I sat in the car for a while, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white, trying to steady the storm in my head. But I couldn't. I couldn't shake the image of Jessica's cold, empty stare. The way she looked at me like I was the problem, like I was suffocating her. I got out, needing something to ground me, something to keep me from drowning in my own thoughts. I walked into the store, bought a pack of cigarettes even though I hadn't smoked in years, and lit one up in the parking lot. The smoke burned my lungs, but the sting felt real in a way that nothing else did. And then, just as I was about to get back in the car, my phone buzzed. I pulled it out, half hoping it was her. Some part of me still wanting an explanation, a reason, anything that would make sense of this mess. But it wasn't her. It was from a number I didn't recognize. "Hey man, this is Ben. Can we talk?" For a second, I thought I was imagining it. I blinked, reread the message, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Ben? The same Ben who had been texting my wife in the middle of the night. The same guy who she swore was just a friend? Why the F*** was he texting me? My first instinct was to ignore it, block the number, throw the phone out the window, anything to keep me from spiraling further. But I couldn't. My curiosity got the better of me, and before I knew what I was doing, I was typing back. "What do you want?" I stood there, staring at the screen, waiting, the seconds dragging out like hours. Finally, the dots appeared, the ones that told me he was typing. My stomach twisted in knots as I waited for his response. "Look, I didn't mean for things to get this messy. I thought you should know what's going on. Meet me. We need to talk." My blood ran cold. My hand shook as I stared at those words. You should know what's going on. My mind was racing, every worst-case scenario flashing before my eyes. Was this some kind of sick joke? Was he playing me? Or was this finally the truth I had been waiting for? I felt the cigarette burn down to the filter between my fingers, the heat snapping me back to reality. I threw it to the ground, stomped it out, and took a deep breath. I didn't know what to expect, but I knew one thing. I needed answers. "Where?" I texted back, my fingers moving before my brain could catch up. A few seconds later, his response came through. "The same bar Jessica and I always meet at, 11:30. I'll be there." My chest tightened. That place. Their usual spot. The one she had been sneaking off to, lying about. It was real. All the pieces were falling into place, but none of it made me feel any better. If anything, I felt like I was standing at the edge of a cliff, looking down into something darker than I'd ever imagined. For a moment, I thought about driving home, pretending I never got the message. Maybe I didn't want to know. Maybe knowing would be worse than whatever I had been imagining. But I couldn't. Not anymore. I needed to hear it from him, from Ben, this guy who had somehow wedged himself into my marriage. I got back in the car, my hands still shaking, and drove to the bar. When I pulled into the parking lot, it felt like stepping into another world. The place was small, tucked away, the kind of dive bar you drive past without noticing. The neon sign buzzed faintly, casting an eerie glow over the empty lot. I recognized it immediately. It was the same bar Jessica had mentioned a few times. Casually, like it was nothing. but now it felt like the epicenter of my crumbling life. I parked the car, took another deep breath, and walked inside. The bar was nearly empty, a few locals scattered around, nursing beers under dim lights. My eyes scanned the room until they landed on him. Ben. He was sitting in a booth near the back, alone, a half-empty glass of whiskey in front of him. He looked different from what I had imagined. Younger, maybe late 20s, with a neatly trimmed beard and tired eyes. He didn't look like the kind of guy who would wreck someone's marriage, but then again, who does? He saw me before I even sat down. His eyes met mine, and there was something there, guilt, maybe. Or was it pity? Either way, I hated it. I hated him, but I forced myself to walk over, sliding into the booth across from him without a word. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The tension was thick, suffocating, like the air was too heavy to breathe. He looked down at his glass, then back up at me, taking a deep breath. "I didn't want it to go this far," he started, his voice low, almost apologetic. I clenched my fists under the table, trying to stay calm, trying not to explode before he even got to the point. "Just tell me what the F*** is going on, Ben." He winced at the sound of his name. "It's not what you think. I swear. We didn't mean for this to happen." "Didn't mean for what to happen?" I snapped, my voice louder than I intended. I didn't care. My patience was gone. "Stop talking in circles and just say it. Did you sleep with my wife?" He hesitated, and that hesitation was the answer I needed. My heart dropped, my whole body tensing as I waited for the words that would destroy whatever was left of my life. "No," he finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But we were close, too close." He ran a hand through his hair, his eyes filled with regret. "She told me things weren't good between you two, that she felt trapped, like she couldn't breathe around you. We started meeting for drinks, and it got out of hand." I sat there, staring at him, my mind blank, unable to process what he was saying. I had prepared myself for the worst, for the confirmation that Jessica had been cheating on me. But this was worse, somehow. The emotional betrayal, the fact that she had turned to someone else for comfort, confided in him about me like I was the bad guy, like I was the one who pushed her into his arms. "And you?" I asked, my voice shaking with barely controlled rage. "You knew she was married, and you went along with it anyway? What kind of man does that?" He looked down at his hands, unable to meet my eyes. "I didn't plan for it. I didn't mean to hurt anyone. I just fell for her." I felt sick to my stomach, the weight of his words crashing down on me like a tidal wave. This was it. The truth I had been waiting for. Jessica wasn't physically cheating. Not yet, at least, but she was already gone. Checked out. She had given her heart, her attention, her emotional intimacy to someone else. And I wasn't enough to stop it. I stood up abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. I couldn't sit there anymore, couldn't listen to him justify his betrayal. My head was spinning, my chest tightening with the weight of everything I had just learned. I needed to get out, to breathe, to escape the reality that was crashing down around me. But just as I turned to leave, Ben said something that made me stop in my tracks. "She's planning to leave you, Daniel." Those words froze me in place. "She's planning to leave you, Daniel." For a moment, I thought I hadn't heard him right. My mind couldn't process it. My heart was racing, my vision blurred, and all I could do was stand there, my back to Ben, replaying that sentence over and over. She was leaving me? My wife, the woman I had built my entire life around, had already made up her mind? I slowly turned around, staring at Ben as he sat there, guilt etched across his face, like he had just delivered the final blow. I wanted to say something, anything, but the words wouldn't come. My mouth went dry, my mind completely blank, and for a few seconds, I felt like I was outside of my own body, watching all of this unfold like it was happening to someone else. Ben looked down at the table, avoiding my eyes, like he couldn't bear to see the destruction he had just caused. "She hasn't told you yet because she's trying to figure out how. But it's coming. I'm sorry, man. I really am. Sorry." My voice came out hoarse, barely recognizable to myself. "You're sorry? You think that fixes this?" My fists clenched at my sides, every muscle in my body tensing as I fought the urge to hit him, to make him feel the pain I was drowning in. He didn't flinch, didn't even look up. I know it doesn't, but I thought you deserved to know the truth before she does it. She's been distant with me too lately. I think she's trying to figure out her next move. Her next move. Like I was just some pawn in a game she had been playing all along. The anger inside me flared hotter than it ever had before, burning through the numbness, igniting everything I had been holding back. My mind flashed with every lie she told me, every night she'd come home late, every dismissive shrug and eye roll that had slowly chipped away at my trust. And now this. I don't need your pity, I growled, stepping toward him, my voice low but shaking with rage. I don't need anything from you. You've done enough. He looked up at me, and I could see the regret in his eyes, but it didn't matter. Nothing he could say would make this right. Nothing could undo the damage. I turned and stormed out of the bar, my heart pounding in my chest, adrenaline surging through my veins. The cool night air hit me like a slap to the face, but it did nothing to calm the storm inside me. I could still hear his voice in my head. She's planning to leave you. The words echoed, bouncing around in my skull, tearing at whatever fragile hope I had left. I got in the car and sat there for a moment, gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. My whole body was trembling, my mind racing through every possible scenario. Could I fix this? Could I confront her? Make her see what she was doing? Or was it too late? But then I remembered how she had looked at me during our last fight. The coldness, the indifference, like she had already checked out, like she was done with me and didn't even care enough to hide it anymore. And now, knowing what I knew, it all made sense. She wasn't just distant because she was stressed or tired. She was distant because she was done. I started the car and drove. I don't even remember where I went. I just drove aimlessly, the streets passing in a blur of headlights and shadows, my mind spinning out of control. The anger was eating me alive, but beneath it, there was something worse, an overwhelming sadness, a deep, gnawing ache in my chest that made it hard to breathe. I had given her everything. I had trusted her. I had built a life with her, a future, and she had thrown it all away for some guy she met at work. But that wasn't the worst part. No, the worst part was that she didn't even care enough to try to fix it. She didn't care enough to fight for us. She was just going to walk away, like I was nothing, like we were nothing. I don't know how long I drove before I ended up back at the house. It was late, well past midnight. The lights were off and everything was quiet. I sat in the car for a long time, staring at the front door, feeling the weight of the night settle over me like a thick, suffocating blanket. Finally, I got out and walked inside. The house felt empty, colder than it ever had before. The silence was heavy, oppressive. I walked through the living room, past the kitchen, up the stairs, and into our bedroom. And there she was, Jessica, lying in bed, asleep like nothing had happened, like her world wasn't about to collapse. I stood in the doorway for a long time, just watching her. She looked peaceful, her chest rising and falling with each steady breath, her face calm, innocent even. It made me sick. How could she sleep so easily when everything was falling apart? How could she pretend like this wasn't happening? Part of me wanted to wake her up, to confront her right then and there, to scream at her, to demand answers. But I couldn't. Instead, I just stood there, feeling the weight of the truth crash down on me all over again. She was leaving me, and she hadn't even told me yet. I turned away, walking back downstairs, my footsteps heavy on the wooden floor. I couldn't sleep, couldn't even think straight. I needed to clear my head, to figure out what the hell I was supposed to do next. Divorce? Fight for her? Confront her? My mind was a mess, and I felt like I was being torn apart from the inside. But one thing was clear. I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine. The truth was out now, and there was no going back. I had to face it, even if it destroyed me. The next morning came too soon. I hadn't slept at all, and my body felt like it had been run over by a truck. Every part of me was exhausted, but my mind was wide awake, replaying the conversation with Ben, the lies Jessica had been feeding me, and that gut-wrenching realization that she was leaving me. As the sun filtered through the blinds, I sat on the couch, staring at nothing in particular, just waiting for her to come downstairs. My thoughts were a tangled mess of anger, confusion, and betrayal. I knew I had to confront her today. There was no more running from it, No more pretending like I could fix this with a few words. I was done waiting for her to come clean. Around 9 a.m., I heard her footsteps on the stairs, and the tension in the air thickened. She walked into the kitchen, completely oblivious to the storm brewing inside me, wearing that same indifferent expression she'd been carrying around for weeks. She poured herself a cup of coffee, not even glancing in my direction. It was like I didn't exist. That was it. I couldn't take it anymore. "Jessica?" I said, my voice surprisingly calm despite the rage bubbling beneath the surface. She looked up, her eyes barely acknowledging me as she took a sip of her coffee. "What?" I stood up, my heart pounding. "We need to talk." There was a flicker of something in her eyes. Annoyance, maybe, but she sighed, setting her mug down on the counter. "About what, Daniel? What now?" I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady, even though I could feel it shaking. "I know about Ben." Her reaction was immediate, but not what I expected. She didn't look shocked, didn't gasp or try to deny it. Instead, she just stared at me, her expression hardening into that cold mask she'd been wearing for so long. She didn't say anything for what felt like an eternity, just studied me like I was some puzzle she couldn't be bothered to solve. Finally, she spoke, her voice flat. "What about him?" My chest tightened. "What do you mean, what about him? You've been lying to me, sneaking around, texting him, meeting him behind my back. You don't think that's something we should talk about?" She rolled her eyes, the gesture so casual, so dismissive. It sent a wave of fury through me. "You're blowing this way out of proportion. Ben and I are just friends. I've told you that 100 times. Friends." I nearly choked on the word. Friends don't text each other in the middle of the night. Friends don't meet at some usual place without telling their spouse. "Stop treating me like I'm stupid, Jessica. I know something's going on. Just admit it." She crossed her arms, leaning back against the counter, her face unreadable. "Nothing happened, Daniel. You're freaking out over nothing." I felt like I was losing my mind. How could she stand there, so calm, so detached, while everything was falling apart? "Nothing happened? Ben told me you're planning to leave me." That got her attention. Her eyes narrowed, and for the first time, I saw a crack in her facade. "He told you that?" I nodded, my heart pounding in my chest. "Yeah, he did. So is it true? Are you leaving me?" Her gaze flickered for a moment, and I saw it, that hesitation, the one that confirmed everything I had feared. She was considering it. She had already made up her mind, but she hadn't told me yet because she was waiting for the right moment. Or maybe she didn't care enough to tell me at all. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet, almost too soft. "I've been thinking about it." The words hit me like a punch to the gut, knocking the wind out of me. "I've been thinking about it." Just like that, like it was something as casual as deciding what to have for dinner. My hands trembled, but I forced myself to stay calm, to keep my voice steady. "Why?" I asked, my throat tight. "Why didn't you tell me? Why are you doing this?" She sighed, running a hand through her hair, and for the first time, I saw a hint of the woman I used to know. "Because, Daniel, I'm not happy anymore. I haven't been for a long time." I felt like the ground had just been ripped out from under me. All the late nights, the coldness, the distance. It all made sense now. She wasn't just cheating emotionally with Ben. She had checked out of our marriage long before that, and I had been too blind to see it. "But why?" I asked again, my voice breaking. "Why didn't you say anything? Why didn't you try to fix it?" Her eyes softened, just for a moment, and she shook her head. "I did try. I don't think you noticed." Those words cut deeper than anything else she had said. I had always thought I was a good husband. I had always believed that, despite the rough patches, we were solid. But standing there, looking at her, I realized that I had been living in a fantasy. I had ignored the warning signs, dismissed the distance between us, convinced myself that we were okay because I didn't want to face the truth. And now the truth was staring me in the face. "I don't know how we got here," I whispered, more to myself than to her. "I thought we were okay. I thought you loved me." She looked away, her jaw tightening. "I did love you. I still care about you, but it's not enough anymore. I'm not enough anymore." The weight of her words crushed me. I had spent so long trying to convince myself that we could work through anything, that no matter what happened, we would always find our way back to each other. But now I wasn't so sure. So what now? I asked, my voice barely audible. Is this it? Are we done? Jessica didn't answer right away. She just stood there, staring at the floor, her hands gripping the edge of the counter as if she needed something to hold on to. Finally, she looked up at me. Her eyes filled with something I couldn't quite read. Regret, maybe, or sadness. Maybe both. I don't know, she said softly. I don't know what happens next. Her uncertainty was almost worse than a straight answer. It felt like I was dangling over the edge of a cliff, waiting for her to either pull me back or let me fall. And she didn't know which one she wanted to do. We stood there in silence, the air between us thick with everything unsaid, everything unresolved. I wanted to scream at her, to beg her to stay, to make her promise that we could fix this. But I couldn't, because deep down I knew it wasn't that simple. And that's when I realized this wasn't just about Ben, or the lies, or the distance. This was about something bigger, something that had been broken for a long time. We had been falling apart, piece by piece, and neither of us had the strength to stop it. Jessica sighed again, her shoulders slumping as if the weight of everything was finally hitting her. I'm sorry, Daniel. I really am. I didn't want it to end like this, but it had. Maybe it had been ending for a long time, and we were just now admitting it. I didn't know what to say, didn't know how to respond to the realization that the woman I loved was already halfway out the door, that she was leaving me not because of some affair, but because she had given up on us. And maybe I had too without even realizing it. I think you should leave, I said quietly, the words surprising even me. She looked at me, stunned, like she hadn't expected me to be the one to say it. But I couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't keep pretending we could salvage this, that we could go back to the way things were. The damage was too deep. For the first time in a long time, Jessica didn't argue. She didn't fight. She just nodded, wiped a tear from her cheek, and walked out of the kitchen, leaving me standing there alone. The sound of the front door closing behind her was like the final nail in the coffin. It was over. The house felt like a tomb after she left. Empty, silent, suffocating. I stood there in the kitchen, staring at the spot where she had been just moments before, trying to process everything that had just happened. The finality of it, the way she walked out without a fight, without even looking back, hit me like a freight train. I had been holding on to some ridiculous hope that, at the last minute, she'd turn around, beg me to work it out, to try again. But she didn't. She was gone, and I knew, deep down, that she wasn't coming back. I sank into a chair, the exhaustion finally catching up with me. My mind was still spinning, replaying the last few days like some twisted film I couldn't turn off. Then, the lies, the indifference, all of it crashing down on me in waves. And for the first time since this all started, I let the emotions flood in. The anger, the betrayal, the heartbreak. I let it hit me full force because I didn't have the energy to fight it anymore. She was really leaving me. It wasn't just a threat, some cruel twist of fate I could undo with the right words. She had already made up her mind. I was no longer what she needed, no longer enough to keep her by my side. It was over. I don't know how long I sat there, staring at nothing, my thoughts running in circles. The sunlight filtering through the windows grew dim, shadows lengthening as the day wore on. I didn't move. I didn't cry. I just existed in that space between devastation and numbness, too tired to feel anything else. At some point, I found myself scrolling through my phone, autopilot, I guess, when I stumbled across an old photo of us. It was from our honeymoon, a picture I had forgotten about. We were standing on the beach, both of us grinning like idiots, arms wrapped around each other like we couldn't imagine being anywhere else. I stared at it for a long time, my heart aching at the memory of what we used to be. The way we used to love each other so fully, so completely. It felt like another lifetime, like I was looking at two people who no longer existed. What happened to them? I wanted to blame Jessica for everything, to hold on to that anger because it was easier than admitting the truth. But sitting there, in the stillness of that empty house, I couldn't escape the reality. This wasn't just her fault. I had a part in it too. I hadn't noticed when the distance started to grow between us, hadn't seen the cracks forming beneath the surface. I had been too comfortable, too sure that we were untouchable. And that's what killed us in the end. My blindness, her indifference, both of us drifting in opposite directions without realizing it until it was too late. I thought about what she said, that she wasn't happy anymore, that she felt suffocated, trapped. The worst part? I couldn't argue with it. I had felt it too, hadn't I? The weight of our routine, the slow decay of our connection. I just hadn't wanted to admit it. I kept hoping that we'd snap out of it, that it was just a phase. But it wasn't. We had been crumbling long before Ben ever showed up, long before the late nights and the cold stares. I stood up, finally, my body aching from sitting still for so long. The house was too quiet, too still, and it felt wrong. This was supposed to be our home, our life together. And now it was just an empty shell, a reminder of everything we had lost. I couldn't stay here, not tonight. I grabbed my keys and headed out the door, the chill of the night air hitting me like a wake-up call. I drove for a while, not really sure where I was going, just needing to move, to breathe. I ended up at the park where Jessica and I used to go on weekends, back when things were good. It was mostly empty now, just a few people walking their dogs or jogging in the cool evening air. I sat on one of the benches near the pond, staring out at the water, trying to clear my head. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even sad. Not in the way I had been earlier. What I felt now was something different. A kind of acceptance, I guess. Jessica was gone and I couldn't change that. Maybe we could have fought harder, maybe we could have done things differently. But that didn't matter now. What mattered was that it was over, and I had to find a way to move forward. I thought about the future, about what came next, and for the first time in a long time I didn't have an answer. Divorce, obviously. That was inevitable now. But after that, I had no idea. My life had been built around Jessica for so long that the thought of living without her felt foreign, like trying to walk on legs that no longer worked. But I'd have to figure it out. I had to, because there was no going back. Sitting there, in the quiet of the park, I realized something. This wasn't the end of me. Felt like it, sure. Felt like my world had collapsed, like everything I thought I knew had been ripped away. But deep down, I knew I'd survive. I'd rebuild slowly, piece by piece, even if I had no idea where to start. I stood up, taking one last look at the pond, and started walking back to the car. The road ahead was going to be hard, no doubt about it. But I had to believe that somewhere down the line, there'd be something better waiting. Something that wasn't built on lies or indifference. Maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of something new. Something I hadn't planned for, but something that was mine to shape. And as I drove away from the park, the last vestiges of my old life slipping into the distance, I realized that this wasn't just a story of loss. It was a story of letting go. Letting go of her, of the past, of everything I thought my life was supposed to be. Because now, it was time to figure out who I was without her.